So let's begin. Tonight, I am so very pleased to bring Jill here. As a longtime admirer of her work, 50 years, and of all these wonderful writers she's translated. As Paul had said earlier, she's one of, if not the most foremost translators of Latin American, of translating from Spanish to English. We are so pleased to have her back. We're so pleased to have Jill, but to give her a proper introduction, I'd like to cede to our favorite author, Mary Heebner.
Look at this crowd. You've got friends.
I know.
I love it. This is wonderful.
And I guess they all wonder why I brought them here tonight.
To buy your book.
Oh, I see.
Buy your book. Well, I have a little quick story, and it has to do with Jill. And the fact that she, through her Unfaithful book, you can see how she and her mentor, lover, Amir Monagal, introduced her to an enormous amount of people. She was like right at, the center point of everything happening. And they recognized her talents and facility for language and metaphor and puns and all those wonderful things. And so in the same way, Jill connects other people. It's just one of the things she does. And I met Jill because I was in Mexico City with my husband McDuff. He was having an exhibit there of his Maya photographs. And I went to the cultural attaché, John Dwyer. And he said, "You're from Santa Barbara, you know Jill." And I said, "I don't know Jill." "Jill? Suzanne Jill Levine." "No." And he said, "You should." And so I got home and I looked up in the white pages. I think most of you know what that
is. It shouldn't be mentioned. But.
And looked her up and cold called her and said, "Hi. John Dwyer sends his regards." And she goes, "Who are you?" And then it turned out we had Harry and Sandra in common and so many other friends. We just became fast friends. And Jill, in her inimitable way, had introduced me to several writers whom I collaborated with. Alistair Reed, Antonio Scamarta, Stephen Kessler, and Clayton Eshelman, to name a few.
And the beautiful Neruda books that
the Pablo Neruda books that Alistair and I collaborated on. So she's kept the tradition alive of passing it forward and getting people who need to know one another to know one another. And see how it works? Look at all this. So Jill, without I don't want to say that, but without hogging too much of the time, I would love you to start reading and do your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Mary has been one of my dearest and loveliest friends here, and oldest friends here in Santa Barbara.
Yes, we are old.
We're old, but we're okay. We still look okay, or more not the same, but okay. So, as I was saying to my dear friend Jean Huving, what the heck am I going to do here? But Jean said you'll be okay. All right. So, obviously, I'm sure you'll have questions about this book because the title actually tries to provoke you to ask a question. So that is one of the things about the book that you should know. It's a book that really is sort of like a sequel to two other books I wrote. The first book was The Subversive Scribe, which came out in 1990, and that was the first. That was a book that also took many, many years. All these books have taken at least a decade, if not more. And that book was really the purpose of that book was to make readers understand, first of all, that translation was a scholarly act, i.e. that in the universities, people who translate should be respected as scholars. Okay, and that was one of the functions of The Subversive Scribe, because it showed how complex the work of the translator is, how creative it is, and how it requires enormous research and enormous knowledge. So, so this was a book that, again, was sort of was moving the, I guess, the whole field of translation theory forward, and that was starting to burst at that time, and so now it's really evolved. And the second book was, well, it was motivated by a death, and that's the way in which some ways this book is motivated. In other words, the memory of these fabulous writers, creative people I knew, who were, when they were alive, they were so alive, and I guess, you know, I wanted for a moment to bring them back, and that's really the main reason I wrote this book, and that's what I was trying to do all along writing it. But the book that I'm mentioning from 2000, which was published by Farrar, Straus and Giroux, is the biography of Manuel Puig, called Manuel Puig and the Spider Woman, His Life and Fictions. And so writing a biography certainly was definitely helpful to me to get into the more autobiographical topic, which I'm dealing with here. And, you know, for many years I've wondered what's the difference between a memoir and autobiography. You know, all these things, I think they have sort of intertwining meanings. I mean, memoirs are very specific in that it's a personal view, and it's a personal view of one's own life, and, you know, you choose what you're going to tell and what you're not going to tell. Whereas I suppose an autobiography makes an attempt to be more, you know, universally informative. But who knows? So so anyway, so I thought what I might just sort of explain the book a little bit and then read a few little sections for you. But I know that readings can sometimes be tedious, so I don't want to overdo that. And then I want to open it up to questions you may have. And so again, I think it's important to look again at the motivations for this book. I mean, first of all, the Latin American boom, I suppose most of you know more or less something about it, right? You might know maybe Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude, and maybe others. And these were, this in other words, this world of writing I discovered as a very young person. And I was lucky because I was in New York City. I was in very good schools, and, you know, I learned quickly what was going on. But actually, the way I discovered Garcia Marquez is very curious. I was in the country of Colombia while I was also studying at Columbia. I was at Colombia and Columbia. I have to pronounce that right. And I met this young poet guy. You know, as a young girl, you meet a lot of young poets, especially in Latin American countries. And he said, "There's a book you must read." I said, "Oh, okay, well, tell me. I want to know." He said, and he gave me, actually, or we bought a copy of, we went to the bookstore, got a copy of Cien Años de Soledad, and for the next 3 days I just disappeared because I could not continue reading that book until I finished it. And to me, that was a very important thing to me, because up until then, I was about 21 or so, I was really confused about what I was going to do. I mean, here I was, somebody who basically loved languages, but, you know, not practical. You know, so basically, I was on this program that was supposedly for students in economics and international relations and stuff like that. So, and I was actually working in a factory in the repair department. I didn't know but I was just supposed to count. I was supposed to count things, which I did more or less. My math is also. But anyway, so basically, but the discovery of that writer. Really, and this really creative kind of writing that was both, what struck me is that it was both new and old at the same time. In other words, it's like old storytelling, but it was totally new. And to me, that combination was almost like an oxymoronic combination. Was really incredible. And so when I came back to the city, I then decided that I was going to focus on translating. And so this book, you know, first of all, is a way to sort of pay homage to the boom, because they're all gone. Basically, they're all gone. Vargas Llosa just died, and that's it. All we have of them is their wonderful books. And so I feel like it's almost my duty to remind you, please don't forget these books. please remember these writers. So that's really one of the purposes of it. But and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to write it, because I had the privilege to know them, some of them quite intimately. And the point of the matter is that I knew practically all the writers of that era. And I mean, and the boom writers, actually, there were boom, there was post-boom, there was, almost boom. I mean, there's a lot of writers in that. I mean, there's, the actual boom writers, what? Borges was considered just because he was so famous. But really, Garcia Marquez, Vargas Llosa, Cortázar, Fuentes, and Borges. I think those were, and then finally, the one that I translated, yay, became actually one of them, Cabrera Infante. I thank my colleague Jorge Luis for reminding me of that. And that was actually the first book I dared to translate, and I told that story in The Subversive Scribe, and I returned to that story in this book, because they're each, in other words, in a sense, as in The Subversive Scribe, I had chapters that were devoted to each writer. So you will find, if you want to meet one of the particular writers, you'll find Swinging London with Cabrera Infante, because that's where you would find him. The next one is the Buenos Aires Affair in New York. That's where you'll find Manuel Puig and me. And then with Bioy Casares in the Bois de Boulogne. Well, that was just a wordplay mixing, Bioy, which is basically a Basque name, and Bois, which is French, so close. So there you go. Okay, so, but the other aspect of the book was, and this was what was very difficult and troubling for me, was that I actually had to write about myself. Yes, I had to write about myself, and my friend, a dear friend in the publishing world, very wise woman and wonderful editor, Karen Braziller, said, Jill, what people are going to read it, they want to know who the person is writing this book. So, yes, all these people were famous and wonderful, but unless they know who you are, they're not going to be interested in the book. So I said, well, that's kind of weird, but I said, okay, so I'm going to write about myself. And so what was my story? How was my story and their story going to come together, aside from the fact of friendships and, more than friendships? Basically, it's sort of about the American dream, as my dear friend Sharon Blumenthal has said. In a sense, it's about a young girl pursuing the American dream. Okay, a young girl who grows up in New York City, coming from a rather modest background, and but well educated, as we were in those days in New York. What am I going to be? Who am I going to be? What am I going to achieve? What is the point of my life? So in a sense, that's what this book was also about. And I assumed that it was that idea or that search or that problem would be something that would also interest, even though I'm of a different generation, I thought it would still interest young people today. So that was one of my hopes in terms of that book. And also part of it was also the challenge of being a woman in a man's world, because, definitely I was living at a time that was not Me Too. It was definitely not Me Too. And now we're living in Me Too, but I'm not too sure how much it really has advanced. I hope it has a lot, but it's still not quite, things are not quite totally equal in the ways that they should be. And I think that challenge also is part of the story. And then in terms of the writers themselves, because the writers that I wrote were, that I translated, were writers that were, in other words, they were the boom, but they were also marginal to the boom, because the boom writers basically were very explicitly, their work was very either about history or politics. And these writers were looking at different topics. I mean, Manuel Puig was looking at what? Hollywood actresses. I mean, betrayed by Rita Hayworth. This book came out in the middle of the 60s in Spain. And, there were some nasty comments by publishers or fellow writers. And, well, what is a Latin American writer writing about Rita Hayworth in the middle of revolution, and we have to, Cuba is important. We have to talk about Cuba. What is this? What exactly is he doing? And yet, obviously, 3 or 4 writers and editors say, "My God, this is an amazing book. This is truly an experimental book." And I think it was Laura Mulvey who said that writers should be experimental but also entertaining. And Manuel Puig is a writer who is definitely exploratory but at the same time entertaining, and that was to me a great accomplishment and what drew me to him a lot. So basically, another, let's say, fire under me to do this book is that, in a way, the writers that I'm talking about, Manuel Puig, it's true that Cabral Infante was in the boom, but still not quite. He was a very controversial figure politically for quite a long time in terms of the whole Cuban story. And other writers like Severo Sarduy, whose Cobra has just been, my translation of Cobra has just been re-released, but it's not a book for everybody. I gotta promise you. But it is fun, but not for everybody. So in any case, so these are some of the motivations to this book. So I guess I should read a few pages so you want to see the quality of the writing.
Yeah. We'll vote on it.
I want to vote. Okay. Well, my friend Jean insisted that I begin with the beginning. So, it's not quite the beginning, but it's one of the beginnings. There's a few beginnings. Anyway, okay. This first actual chapter, where the heck is it? It's called Beginnings, actually. Basically, it begins this way. If my parents hadn't died when they did, I doubt that I would have ever left the city to go away to college. I grew up in the 1950s in a New York Jewish American family of limited means. I was the youngest of 4, almost a generation younger than my siblings, and we lived in the close quarters of a 2-bedroom apartment between Washington Heights and Inwood, 30 blocks south of the northern tip of Manhattan. So it's not actually the Upper West Side where, really good people come. My family lived in the Heights from my birth, and of course the Lin Miranda musical is about the same heights, which after the era of European refugees then became a refuge to Dominican people, and so that's what he was dealing with. But I was before that time. My family lived in the Heights from my birth to 1963, when it was mainly a neighborhood of Jews, Irish, Italians, Greeks, and recent refugees from the Second World War. One of the most famous or infamous being Henry Kissinger. The world-class dancer Jacques d'Amboise also came from the hood, and as I said, later it became the Dominican territory of Lin-Manuel Miranda's hit musical In the Heights. These days, of course, Washington Heights is gentrified, and those big apartments with their high ceilings are in high demand. Like many native, quote unquote, New Yorkers in my 20s, I never considered living anywhere else, except, of course, cosmopolitan meccas like, Paris or London. My inner map of the United States sort of resembled Saul Steinberg's famous New Yorker cartoon, where he depicts New York as separated from the rest of the country, sketched out as an undefined expanse located vaguely west of the Hudson River. That's where we are now. While I am no Freud, I suspect that, and this is a quick change from another topic, while I am no Freud, I suspect that living as a small child in an apartment in close quarters with my brothers and sisters, very attractive young adults who were somewhere between siblings and parental figures to me, might have nurtured my bisexual leanings. I had to mention that too. I mean, Karen said, if you don't talk about that, forget about it. So as the queer revolution had not yet happened, bisexual was the definition that seemed to fit me, though I wouldn't recognize this reality until my early 30s. The one advantage as the youngest of my family was that I belonged to the 60s. a more progressive era when girls were supposed to be as well educated as boys, to have more fulfilling lives, and to make the world better. It was no longer acceptable, as in the case of my older sisters, not to educate girls. And unlike my sisters, I was expected, like my peers, to seek a college education. So now I have to bring in the language part because you'll think I'll do good digressing. If not. When I had started French at age 12 in junior high school 52, back in the late 1950s, I took to language class, I have to say, like a duck to sauce à l'orange. We had a perversely witty male teacher with a British accent who reminded me of the actor Alastair Sims, the one who played with intelligent irony a comically neurotic Scrooge in the 1950s film version of A Christmas Carol, which was my favorite version because that's the one I saw as a kid. You know, the version that you know, that the version of the book that you first read or the version of the movie you first read, that's your favorite, right? So there you go. I was captivated by how speaking another language allowed me to be someone else, to bring forth a part of myself that seemed to express itself more fully in the other language. So now I'm gonna skip to now what happened in college, where I went to Vassar, and that's a whole other story, but you'll have to read about it. Buy the book. Okay, college in the 1960s, compared to these days, had more rigorous requirements in the liberal arts, and we were required to know not only one, but a second and sometimes even a third language. French gave me a head start, obviously, to acquire another Romance language, or other Romance languages with greater ease. And because of French, in high school I was already thinking of a career at the United Nations as an interpreter. The UN had a lot of prestige, yeah, you know, and there was the glamorous Audrey Hepburn as an interpreter in Charade. And then also remember UN and the striking Hitchcockian images in North by Northwest. I mean, wow. But my UN fantasy quickly faded after serious conversations where I learned about more about the polyglot requirements and the rigorous tedium of this highly technical skill. So I wasn't going to do that. I chose Spanish, or perhaps Spanish chose me, a pragmatic path of least resistance, as it was considered a relatively easy language to learn, and as I was in the infirmary with mononucleosis, the kissing disease, for the first 2 weeks of class. This seemed like a good choice. My first Spanish professor, the affable Senor Del Rio, dapper, gray-haired, meticulous, a no-nonsense Vassar teacher with a clear Castilian accent, was far more welcoming than the tense young French instructor teaching my freshman French class. She seemed aloof and cold. You know how we sometimes think about the French, especially in Paris. But now it's not true. But anyway, now, having been a teacher for so many years, or actually, you know, that's already over. I realized that as a newcomer, this poor woman must have been nervous. And I almost felt a retrospective sympathy for her, and I felt really bad that I had been so negative about her supposed coldness. You see, children can be so, you know, they don't appreciate it. Anyway, so, in any case, the Spanish teachers seemed livelier and, while rigorous, less judgmental, with more joie de vivre, ironically, than the French. I chose Spanish as my major by a process of elimination, which, as you know, is often a common method among students. Our class advisor, the decadent-looking Italian teacher, Mr. Domandi, with his pock-marked face, whose name sounded in Italian like a cross between tomorrow and Sunday, tilted the scale with one compelling reason. Known to be flirtatious, Mr. Domandi confirmed my impression that Spanish was more practical in today's world. I sensed, of course, that the Italian professor considered French and Italian culture superior to Spanish, and I have to say, I had the same unspoken prejudice. My earlier awareness of Hispanic culture had been limited to comic moments on TV shows, like Senor Wences or Ricky Ricardo, I Love Lucy, or, My Name is Jose Jimenez, those kind of things that we were exposed to, the only things that we discovered in popular culture. This bird's eye view of Hispanic culture would grow into admiration at college, where I would read great literary works. Another plus of majoring, of course, in a Romance language, which would be very compelling for a student of modest means, was the opportunity to spend junior year in a foreign country. So, if you want me to continue reading, I'll go to the next section, which is where I was living in Spanish. And you guys tell me when I should shut up. Okay. One often, and this is called living in Spanish, so one often amusing pitfall during my first months in Spain was the embarrassment of uttering, unintentionally, something either absurd or obscene in Spanish. And why is this? Because words mean different things in different Spanish languages. And, well, there are all many different Spanish languages. We'll talk about that in a minute. For example, pico, the word for mountain, in Chile means prick, you know, and not metaphorically. Concha, which means seashell, is in slang in Argentina and Uruguay for the vagina. Well, the Chilean word guagua means infant, while in Cuba it means bus, derived from the English wagon. You know, guagua, wagon bar. Okay, you got it? Yeah. So that if in a Chilean story a woman lifts up a baby, the same phrase read by a Cuban would actually mean that the woman was performing a Herculean feat. So these were important differences. So that was definitely an interesting issue. But I do want to read funny stories here to you. So I'm going to read a story about, because you know, for me to end up, to be on an airplane was my first airplane. It was the first time I was going to a foreign country. You can imagine how both terrifying and magical it was. And that's really the truth. It was that magic of being in this new world, which was such an old world, and have taken that damn airplane, which was really, wow, like, you know, going to the moon, these were two really very exciting experiences for an 18-year-old from Washington Heights. So anyway, but I do want to tell some funny stories here. One of them is about my brother, my sister Alice, who was really like my adopted mother and probably the person I love most in my life, because she took over when my mother died, insisted that my brother, who was studying to be an ophthalmologist, do his residency in Spain, because there was actually a very famous institute called the Barraquer Clinic. So basically he followed his sister's instructions, because, you know, sisters are strong and brothers are weak. So basically what happened was that he came there, and on his way to Barcelona, where he was going to live, he visited me in marvelous Madrid. And I really haven't described Madrid yet, but I'll do some descriptions. Anyway, we were just going to spend a day in Madrid. So both of us newcomers especially wanted to see a flamenco show. Well, of course. And so we got into a cab. I asked the driver to take us to flamenco, and he dropped us off at a place that had a huge restaurant and bar, as well as a stage for the flamenco. The maître d', or whatever he was at the door, looked at us with curiosity. And I assumed it was because of our informal, typical American clothes. I was wearing sandals, and what was casually fashionable then, was a Madras wraparound skirt. You guys remember that? Very handy in many ways. So the Madras, okay. And my brother, you know, poor guy, just arrived, he had jet lag, didn't wear a jacket or tie. Wow. The maître d' seemed for some strange reason, to take us under his wing and led us to the other end of the restaurant immediately, so that we could have a front seat, our table, right against the railing overlooking the stage below, which was going to be very exciting. As we had entered, though, we had both noticed only single women at every table, very dressy and wearing lots of makeup. I asked my brother, why are those women sitting alone? To which he answered, it must be between shows. And, you know, they're waiting for their husbands who went to the men's room. Okay. Was he pulling my leg, or was he as naive as myself? I actually never really found out, but we were, he was 12 years older. We were served the delicious traditional sangria and encouraged by the waiter to watch the show that was just beginning. The dancers' agility and the strutting, the music's intensity, the colors of the costume, the novelty of flamenco, even in that commercial venue, was thrilling. But when it was intermission, Donnie, my brother, said, suddenly in a rush, "We should leave now." Finally, it had dawned on him. A little slow on the uptake, maybe from the jet lag. After we were in a taxi, he explained to me that this was a pickup dive, and the women were call girls. We both felt embarrassed as we exited. How could we be so dumb? It was clear that the driver obviously took us there because he had an agreement with the brothel bar restaurant and assumed that we were naive Americans, which is what we were. That's not a surprise story, but it's a good one. Okay. You want other stories, or?
Yeah, let's go one more and then we'll do a Q&A.
Okay, one more story than that. Okay. Well, okay. Well, I'll tell the, where the heck is it? I'll tell the, well, just to give you a little more feeling of my everyday life in Madrid, and then we'll pass on. Where the heck is it? Okay, it's here somewhere. Oh, Jesus. It's one of these books that keeps going back and forth, you know. Okay. All right. Okay. So, okay, well, I begin this last part by saying that, you know, that the feeling I had was I fell easily into Spanish like a shoe that fit, as if some part of me came out in the performance of the language. And you might not think of it, but all language is performative. And to mimic this language of superlatives seemed to require one to speak more assertively or confidently, or maybe just louder than in American English. Spanish is such a flexible language with its diminutives and augmentatives, expressive usages we don't have in English, jokes and wordplays, expanded my repertoire exponentially during that year. So, the saying goes that the pillow is the best teacher of any language, and this is a truism that I'm sure many of you can confirm. But even just going out with friends to enjoy bustling bars with their animated bartenders and, you know, where the tapas were served and all this wonderfulness and, you know, pinchos morunos and grilled prawns and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, Madrid was a nocturnal city, and that was, for me, also to be living a nocturnal life was, again, another thing that was so wonderful at age 18 or 19. The long afternoons and evenings as the high plateau sun set were especially pleasurable, a time of day called la tarde. Now, curiously, the word tarde, which as an adjective means late, as a noun means both afternoon and evening, which is a real conundrum when you're translating. Okay, so I mean, are you going to say afternoon or evening? So that was like something that even going from tapa to tapa, you had to worry about that word. The other interesting thing about being out at night was coming home late. On those extended nights meant you had to clap hands for the sereno. The sereno was the night watchman, and hoping he was nearby to open the door to the building where you lived. The word sereno was like poetry, a metonym for the thing itself, as if the watchman's main function was to preserve the night's serenity merely by being there. Often you'd find yourself, however, in total darkness on the indoor stairs because the 1 minute light sometimes didn't even last a minute and didn't give you enough time to reach the next button before the minute was up. Then you were on your own and had to find the next button, groping along the walls, and run up step by step before the light went out again. Thank you. Okay, now questions.
So I'm curious, I have a friend, Jean Lees, who wrote a lot of lyrics for Antonio Carlos Jobim, so Quiet Nights of Quiet Stars, It's Happy Madness, and he did not translate the songs. He actually wrote original lyrics that provided the feeling of the songs.
Right.
So it's not, and a lot of people just assume that they're translations. So I wonder how you approach that idea when you're translating these authors?
Well, that's where Unfaithful comes in. Yeah, I mean, that they are translations, probably in the best sense. You know, the idea of fidelity is a utopic idea, okay? So essentially, to find those equivalents is a wonderful discovery. In other words, to find, to invent or find lyrics that actually give, in some way, the original flavor or rhythm or of that, or feeling of that music is really great. I mean, that is really what you have to do when you're with music, the translation of musical lyrics. But of course, in some ways, it's what you have to do in all of translation. You know, it's a matter of degrees. Okay, so I would say that is unfaithful, but that's translation.
So did you have an author that had an issue with how you translated?
No, because if I did, I wouldn't speak to them. I'm just joking. Anyway, so basically, you see, the interesting thing that the authors I translated were definitely more marginal types, like me. You know, I'm a marginal type. So, so basically, they were creative writers, and I guess it was they basically wanted the reader to experience the text as they had meant it to be experienced. So it's the experience, the effect of the text. So no, they were. I mean, obviously, there's such a thing as mistakes in translation, and a lot of people make them. But that's not the same thing. The thing is, basically to find the best possible way of bringing, a certain term or feeling into the text that's the whole thing.
The alma.
That's right. but it's still about the letra. It's all about being. I mean, the translator tries to be a good translator tries to be as literal as possible. But it's out of that literal version that you then start to see, with looking at both the original and the literal, where you're going to find a place where English is going to get closer, ironically, than the literal version.
Yeah.
So that's a really superficial way of saying it, but that's yeah.
A related question, are there any particular expressions, common expressions in the Spanish language you feel are just untranslatable? I think in particular, many times when I'm speaking English, and I like to use an English equivalent, and there's none, I think, for the Spanish expression, menos mal.
Menos mal. Yeah. Well, that's a good one, menos mal. Well.
How would you translate it?
Wow.
It requires a 3 sentences or 4 sentences.
Well, it depends on how it's used in the sentence.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so it can.
It's always ironic or
It's
comic.
yeah, menos mal, well, good thing, or so it could be a good thing, or a bad thing, or it's sort
That's
of
a
like,
big difference.
it depends upon how it's being used.
People say at least that.
At least that. There you go. This is my best translator over here. Yeah, at least that.
How about saudade?
What?
Saudade.
What's that?
The Portuguese word, saudade.
Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
But say it in Portuguese though.
I thought I was saying it.
Okay.
Saudade.
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 No, but yes, I mean, obviously.
There are words that evoke a feeling that you can't translate.
I mean, the metaphors are always going to be different, right? Like, for example, every cloud has a silver lining. How do you say that in Spanish?
Menos mal.
No hay mal que por bien no venga. So, so in other words, sometimes there's a good comes with the bad. Oh, so many hands, so little time. Go ahead, yeah.
Which work has been the most challenging to translate and why?
Wow. That's a hard question to answer. There are different kinds of difficulties. Like the book cover that I was just mentioning, that is just a very, which has just been reissued by Deep Vellum, which in itself is hard to translate. Basically, I would say Severo Sardu is one of the hardest writers who translate. But then again, he descends from Lesama Lima, who's even harder to translate. And these are writers who are totally untranslatable, and yet they've been translated. ¿Qué ibas a decir?
No, nothing. I was.
No, puedes hablar. Sí. Yes? Anybody want to add something? These guys know better about this than I do.
No. Yeah.
What?
No, when you mentioned Lesama, that.
Lesama.
What I was going to say is
It's
that
not really
Lesama
translated.
at least Lesama tells you something. It's at least just words. I found it really hard.
Well, yeah. Well, he's just in another. He's in another context, in another world. You know.
I know.
What is no mean feat to translate something?
No. No, it's not a mean feat, and I've done several. But that's madness. Oh yes.
What about translating from one medium to another? For instance, novels Before Night Falls, and the making of the and.
Well, that's very interesting, and of course that was a topic of my chapter on Manuel Puig on Kiss of the Spider Woman, because Kiss of the Spider Woman was a novel that was translated into a film, and it's. I mean, if anybody knows any of my writers, it would be Manuel Puig because of that film. That's why you know, not because of the book. And the film is really a far cry from the book, and yet it managed to do something that book wanted to do. It wanted to bring to the audience, and that was to a Latin American audience, but also world audience, about sexuality, the sexual politics. It wanted to bring the fact that you have to be more open-minded, and people are so repressed and not open-minded. So that was part of what that book was trying to say. And there are many ways of being, and you have to respect difference. So that was what that book was about, and that film really tells that story. And it also tells love conquers all, even though it's tragic. I was going to quote for you Leo Tolstoy. I was watching something the other night, a film about the life of Tolstoy, and he said something that really struck me. He said, "Everything I know because I love." And I think that that's so true both of writers and translators. Okay, that's what they share in common, because oh yes, Janet.
I wonder if you could please describe some of the scenes of your translation. For example, were you in the same room, or were you translating through correspondence? So you're the translator, and what is the relationship with all these translatees with whom you've been involved?
Well, I want you to read the book.
That's why I asked.
She says it better than I do. She really does. This one is a better writer than I am. Yeah, ask her. Yeah, I know that's a great question. Yes.
I wanted to ask you a question. Why in all the chapters do you hook up and mention films? How does film relate to your love of Spanish and also the showmanship of it that you mentioned?
Yes.
Was that did that just happen, or an idea that as you were writing?
One thing that's very curious about this book, because it's about writers, the translation, but film plays a very important role, thanks to Janet and Sharon Cooper Blumenthal bringing this up. And yes, it's so true that film was very important to me, but I think it was very important to everybody in a certain era, and I think my family, basically we lived in an era. I mean, they survived the Depression. So what's a good way to not be depressed? Go to a movie, watch a movie. And so movies, as a child living in the city, that was the greatest pleasure, to be taken by my parents to a movie, which often wasn't appropriate, because since they didn't have a babysitter, they took me to any old movie. And for example, And God Created Woman at age 12. I mean, come on. But I'm saying, the movies were very much a part of my love for literature, and it was very much a part of all these writers' love for writing.
So does that mean you're on the brink of doing an adaptation or a transliteration of, let's say, a book into a screenplay? What do you think you would? What would be the stumbling block to do that? In
To
terms
do
of,
what? To do what?
To adapt a book to a film.
To a screenplay. Oh yeah. No, it's a translation.
Right.
It's a real challenge because it's a different language. As you said, Mary said a different media, and Mary, for example, goes between art, the pictorial and the literary. I mean, I think that in term when there's a good film made based on a novel, I think that's a great achievement, and it may not be totally. What?
What's next? Are you moving back to Spain?
Oh. Well, Spain in 1965 is not exactly the same or 66 as the Spain today. Spain is still wonderful. I have to say Madrid is still a wonderful city, and I think that while global tourism, in other words, when we went to Europe in the 1960s, those who did, we were fortunate to see a Europe that belonged to the Europeans still. And I don't think that's the case now, unfortunately. But I think Spain is kind of amazing that way. Well, Barcelona, they're suffering. But I think Madrid is a city that actually maintains itself despite the tourists. But about living there, I would love to. But, can I take my health insurance? I don't know.
Take one more question.
Yes.
What language do you dream in?
And what do you dream about?
Or who? We got to read the book for that one.
Yeah. Yes.
I have a serious question. So between Subversive Scribe and Unfaithful, has your understanding of translation changed? Have you become more or less unfaithful?
No, I'm a steady state. But I think that what happened here is that I think that both of them were meant to be provocative titles, I don't know if they really are, but that's the point, is that they want to bring to the fore, that translation is not what you think it is. And it really is, a translator is an artist, a real translator. Not everybody who translates is an artist. So, I mean, that's one of the main points of the Subversive Scribe, but this is a story which actually talks about why one translates. What is there about translation that fulfills something, and so that's a deeper thing. Yeah.
I just want to thank you. This is so wonderful, and really the afterword to the book is just about as interesting as any of the other chapters, because it speaks to that.
Oh, right, that's
and,
right. Yeah.
And it's just chock full of these wonderful stories, and I want
So buy the book.
Let's thank Jill for this wonderful.